Sir Jacko, I'm curious to know how you and other ex-Sea Org members go about finding work when you get out. It must be especially hard for folks who have been in for many years. Not only do you have to re-examine and redefine yourself and your beliefs, I can't imagine how much of a mindfuck that must be, but you're going from a situation where your living expenses were paid for in exchange for your servitude to having to provide for yourself in the real world. How do you go about writing a resume or filling out a job application when you spent the last 17 years in a cult? Amy Skiba. After so many years in Scientology, what difficulties did you face, if any, transitioning to a non-Scientology life? I've received a few questions about this, and I made a video called Recovering from Scientology where I broke down various steps that I've been going through. But in terms of real-world, practical, how did I start, how did I land, and how did I start making a living, and how do you transition? It's rough. It's not necessarily easy, and the points that are being made in these questions are good points. Basically, I had, so I'll talk about myself. I had certain life skills that were translatable to the real world: graphic design, computer programming. I learned how to do that, and some degree of administration and clerical work. Things like that. I can type, 100 words a minute, that kind of thing. So I had some translatable skills. However, I put all this into a resume, and I had Church of Scientology on it. And when I first got out, I didn't know the horror with which employers would look at that. I just had no idea how badly Scientology was regarded in the real world when I first got out. So I was sending my resume out all over the place, and I was getting nothing back, no answers of any kind. And it was rough. And if you wonder why it is that a lot of, or you might not know this, but a lot of people who leave the Sea organization will go be employed by a Scientologist. They'll go get a job with a Scientologist because that's the only place that those skills translate somehow. And that kind of also works in the benefit of the Church of Scientology because it keeps them in the fold, it keeps them in the system. And in fact, that's the first job I got when I got out of Scientology, is I got a job with a Scientologist. And I happened to I was a hard worker, and I was very go-getter. That's one thing the Sea Org does give you as a work ethic. So I didn't have a problem working all the time. So that came to the notice of somebody else, so that when that job with that Scientologist didn't actually work out, another couple who were not Scientologists, had nothing to do with Scientology, saw that I had valuable work skills, and they hired me, and that was through word of mouth. So that's how I transitioned, and then that allowed me some stability and to get my feet really on the ground. And thank God that happened when it did, because it was also during that time that I was going down the rabbit hole of Scientology on the internet and finding out just how corrupt and horrible and awful of an organization it was. So those two things for me, I guess you could say maybe I lucked out in that happening. I'm a hard worker, so I don't know that it was all luck, but that was kind of what happened. Other people don't have such a smooth transition comparatively. Family is very helpful. Friends are very helpful. I know coming out of the Sea organization, you're not going to have a lot of real-world friends, but hopefully you'll have some family that you could fall back on or assist with, and there are people out in the real world, ex-Scientologists, who will lend a helping hand. They've been burned a few times in some cases, so sometimes they're not so willing. When a person comes out of Scientology, or especially out of the Sea organization, their head is in all kinds of weird places, and they can feel very entitled. There's a lot of feeling of entitlement and the world owes me, and that's this sort of thing, which is just leftover Scientology crap that a person kind of has to get over. Thank God I didn't have too much of that, but I had plenty of adjusting to do. Family was of great assistance to me in that regard, which is why I consider myself very lucky to have such a great family. So that was my transitioning process, and from that I can only offer bits of advice to others as best you can. Find people who can be of assistance and use whatever work skills you did have, because a lot of the skills in the C organization do translate over into the real world in one way or another, and you can land and build up an income, and don't go running around worrying about partying and worrying about making a lot of friends and all that kind of stuff. You gotta buckle down and actually get a life set up, and then build from there. And fortunately, that's how I went about it. So.